the federal government has an existing program that they're walking away from. It's for low-income families.
The governor is PO'd. He says he will sue Washington over threats to shut down money for safety net hospitals like Jackson.
Missing deadline. Lawmakers standoff over Medicaid puts tax cuts and your whole state budget in jeopardy.
Just yesterday, a leader from yesterday began a campaign for president by promising to take us back to yesterday.
Marco makes it official. He is in the hunt for the White House, and he says he is the candidate of the future.
Good Sunday morning. Welcome aboard. Welcome, everybody. With just 2 weeks left in the state lawmaking session, the one must-do job remains undone.
There is really only one thing lawmakers are required to do: pass a budget. But they are $4 billion apart on the one for the coming fiscal year, and the main bone of contention is whether to expand Medicaid in the state. The state Senate is for it, using a state-run insurance exchange and private insurance companies. The State House of Representatives and the governor are against, and now the governor says he will sue Washington over a decision to stop funding the low-income pool, which reimburses state hospitals that treat the poor. People with insurance, of course, already subsidize the poor when they show up for treatment in emergency rooms.
A leading voice on this and other issues in the state Senate is Ani Terry Flores of Southwest Miami-Dade. She is a Republican and a veteran lawmaker who this year chairs the Miami-Dade legislative delegation. And State Representative Katie Edwards is a powerful voice in the House. She's a Democrat who represents Southwest Broward. She was elected to the State House in 2012. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Great to have you both here. Senator Flores, let me begin with you. There is this impasse, $4 billion difference in the budget. How are you going to resolve this?
Well, at this point, really, that's a question for the Republican leadership in the Florida House of Representatives.
Well, you're part of the leadership.
Yeah, well, the Republican leadership in the Senate has put forth a very detailed plan. We have said we can't leave 800,000 Floridians out to dry. That's the number of Floridians who do not have health care. The number of Floridians who, when they get sick, they show up at hospitals, and the rest of us, the rest of the 16 million Floridians, we're the ones who are paying for them. So the Senate has put forward a plan. As you said, this is not traditional Medicaid expansion. This is something that's going to use private insurance companies, private exchange, require the recipients of this plan to work, actually require them to pay a small copay. We've put forward this plan, and the House is just not biting.
The Medicaid, just to be clear for everybody watching, the Medicaid expansion issue is the budget issue.
That is absolutely correct.
Representative Katie Edwards in the House, the Senate has a plan, the House has no plan.
The House has nothing right now because we have within even the GOP leadership, we have two factions. We have the Senate Republicans and we have a divided Republican caucus in the House. You have some folks that I believe truly understand, especially those lawmakers from South Florida. I mean, look, we're talking about 80,000 Broward residents that could benefit from some version of Medicaid expansion, 100,000 Miami-Dade residents that would also benefit. And you have lawmakers torn between their party allegiances and alliances that they've made in leadership, and you have them back home trying to make sure they represent their constituencies. It's a very, very tough call for, I would say, more of the House Republicans than Democrats in both sides and also in the Senate.
And if anybody, I'm sure a lot of people did read the Miami Herald this morning. And in fact, here is this morning's Herald. 850,000 is what it says here in a piece called Falling into the Coverage Gap. In a little bit, we will talk to the author, the reporter on this, Dan Chang, of the Herald. But, you know, Ani Terry, when you read the stories here of the men and women who are caught, they don't make enough money to qualify for Medicaid as it exists or to qualify for subsidies on Obamacare, their lives are hanging in the balance, their health.
Yep. These are real people. This could be any of ours, aunt, uncle, brother, sister, mother, father. Folks who are sick, folks who are having to make decisions as to whether to put food on the table or whether to take their medicines. Some of those stories are heartbreaking. Individuals who have to, you know, cut their pills in half so that they can just make it through to the next day. And what the Senate is proposing is saying, let's give them a lifeline. Let's do something, because when those individuals who are sick, those who are mentioned in the story, when they show up at Jackson Memorial Hospital, or when they're young children and they go to Miami Children's Hospital, Miami Children's doesn't close the door on anybody. What they do is that they essentially end up charging the rest of us more, so we're still paying.
How, though, does the Senate plan differ from what we would be calling Medicaid expansion?
Okay.
Is it more of a personal responsibility issue?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. First and foremost, Medicaid in the state of Florida is already under a managed care system. So much like probably most of us here at the panel, most people watching, we have a managed care system that's given to us through our employer. So what Medicaid is right now is a system of private insurance companies where one gets to choose their provider. Also, the difference is that under the Senate's plan, there would be a requirement that the recipient would have to work, or at minimum be putting in a very good faith effort to look for work. That's not something that's required in Medicaid. And the third major difference is that they would have to provide some sort of copay. That copay may go from $2 to $30 a visit, but something so that the individuals have some sort of skin in the game so that they're responsible with their health care coverage as well.
Right. You know, Representative Edwards, there are the House Republican leaders, especially a gentleman named Richard Corcoran, seems to be driving the policy in the House. He said, we're not going to dance with the Senate. We're not going to expand Medicaid under any form. When you hear these arguments on the House floor, what is the rationale for not doing this?
Well, I think they need to stop kowtowing to groups like Americans for Prosperity and start dancing with the people in the state of Florida.
And Americans for Prosperity, if anybody doesn't know, are sponsored by the Koch brothers.
Right. You know, we've had 2 years. The stage has been set, and we have had, you know, in 2013, House Democrats brought everything to a standstill. We went back to reading the bills in full to make the point on the budget. The time is now to address these issues. Fast forward the 2 years, what work have we done? Nothing. So we're facing a potential shutdown with our partners in the Senate. They should not be our enemies. I mean, these are the folks we have to work with to pass policy and to implement a budget. So when someone says, you know, I'm not going to do this, he's not speaking for me, Katie Edwards, for the House Democrats or for the Senate. So I think it's a very self-serving motivation.
Well, and here's a little bit of the challenge is that because, you know, the state budget funds several different issues beyond just healthcare, of course. But since we have a $4 billion hole, when folks come and talk to us about increased funding for our Dade County Public Schools, for Florida International University, for Miami-Dade College, for our state roads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, no decisions on any of that can be made until we deal with this healthcare issue.
And you know, it's so hard, I think, for people to understand who are watching, who are not part of the process, is they hear the governor, they hear House Republicans saying, we're not taking any federal money for this program. We haven't even talked about the low-income pool money yet, which is another story.
Yeah.
But here, they're listening to, especially the governor saying, we don't want any federal money, but the budget in this state is built with federal money in many ways.
In fact, about a third of our budget right now is federal dollars.
A third.
And let's be very clear. How do federal dollars come to be federal dollars? They are the dollars that all of us pay, that we send to the federal government, and all that we're doing in Florida under this plan is saying we ask for our fair share back. The same way that South Floridians, we lament the fact that we send money up to Tallahassee and we want to get our fair share back. Well, we have House Republicans saying that they do not want that to happen when it comes to federal health care dollars.
They want to subsidize everyone else in other states. But, you know, it made a very good point. Former Senate President Don Gates, it's my money, I want it back.
Exactly.
We're talking about $51 billion of Floridians' money that we can use to grow jobs here in the state. We're talking about creating essentially 81,000 new jobs based in health care. You know, think about the nurses, the ARNPs, the healthcare centers. We're trying to create jobs. This is the most job-friendly package and public policy we can be discussing today.
You would think, one would think the jobs governor might be swayed by those arguments.
Who made his money in healthcare, by the way.
Allow me to play devil's advocate for a second because, you know, let's just say, so what is the argument on the other side, right? So the argument on the other side is the following. We don't trust that the federal government is going to give us all this money that they're promising. So here's what the Senate has said. The Senate has said, well, the federal government has said that up and through 2016, they will pay 100% of this. As we move forward, that will eventually come down to 90%. The Senate, through its negotiations, has said, well, federal government, would you be open to when you're only paying for 90%, that we could, rather than put in the money to fill in that extra 10%, could we just kind of figure it out, have the same program, but maybe cut costs so we save money? So essentially, we wouldn't be putting in new state dollars. Rather, we would just be running the same program, but perhaps cutting costs elsewhere. Even to that program, the House Republicans, even to that proposal, the House Republicans have been hesitant just out of fear of saying, well, the federal government won't put up their side of the bargain. And that's just hard for us to deal with, because at some point, one has to get past the rhetoric and one just has to govern.
Well, and maybe that's going to be in a special session. Now, let's go to the corollary. There are really two parts to this argument, and the other is the so-called low-income pool, which is, what, $2.3 billion, which the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services gives to the state of Florida to hospitals like Jackson and the Broward health system
and all
Memorial.
hospitals.
Oh, Miami Children's. I mean, every hospital receives some.
Right. Every hospital gets it for treating people who are uninsured. Well, the governor this week said, I'm going to sue the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And I asked him, what is his objection to the low-income pool, and why is he going to sue? Here's what the governor had to say.
Governor, you were against expanding Medicaid, then you were for expanding Medicaid, now you're against it again and you're suing the CMS. What's wrong with expanding Medicaid?
Here's what's happening in our state. First off, the federal government, if they have a program and they want to fund a federal program, I'm not going to stand in their way. But let's look at what they're doing. They have a federal program called it's a low-income pool. Started in 2006. It's over $2 billion. It's for low-income families. And now they're saying they're going to walk away from it, and they're trying to hold us hostage. They're trying to say if we don't expand Obamacare, they're going to stop that program. That's wrong. Obamacare has not worked. It's not been a good program, but they shouldn't be holding us hostage. It's the wrong thing to do.
Is that true? It's not a walk away from. That was a program set to expire that has an expiration date.
Let's again talk about the planning. We knew from CMS at least 2 years ago they raised issues over transparency, over exaggerated reimbursement rates. They told us, get your house in order. You need to be able to demonstrate to us you've taken care of these housekeeping issues before we go back and talk about LIP extension. Because remember, LIP was a time certain deadline. So I read a letter from CMS. We're both attorneys. We read it and we say, you know what, all they're reminding us is that, look, these are the benefits to potentially expanding Medicaid. CMS is following very closely what's happening in the Senate. They're looking at this saying, if you do this, you can potentially address many of the shortfalls that LIP is going to encounter in that gap. So it makes sense, lawmakers, to expand in some fashion, so you're not going to have to address the LIP issues.
All right,
in other areas.
hold your thought there, Anna Terry. I know you want to jump in, but we are going to take a brief break, and we'll be back more with State Representative Katie Edwards and Senator Annie Terry Flores. On this Sunday morning, live in our studio, two leading state lawmakers, and we just heard from, on tape, Governor Rick Scott. And I want to put up a quote from a Miami Herald editorial in this morning's paper. This is what they say about the governor's threat to sue. They say it is a politically inspired grandstand play that utterly fails to protect the interests of the people of Florida and defies logic. It demands that the federal government offer Florida one pot of money, even while the state rejects the other. Katie Edwards, you think the Herald has got it right?
I think grandstanding is a very good way of putting it. Absolutely. You know, we've had 2 years to address this and talk about the policy concerns. And if the real concern, too, was addressing why health care coverage is so expensive in the first place, we've had 2 years to enact policies to address various health care mandates, talking about access, even expanding scope of practice to drive down those costs. So I think it's been a missed opportunity, very frustrating right now.
And it's worth it to say that it's 2/3 into a 60-day session.
Yeah, well, I think that the issue is that I think we would, because grandstand is a big word as well. I mean, I imagine, you know, I know that the governor has been elected and wants to speak on behalf of what he believes is best for Floridians. And so if that's the case, and I have to believe that the governor is coming from a good place, then what would be beneficial to the conversation is for the governor to present what his alternative is.
Yeah, but he hasn't presented an alternative.
And once he does, then we can have a debate on that issue. We can also have a debate if House Republicans would have one. Then we would have multiple plans to debate, whereas we sit here right now, there's only one plan, so we're really just waiting for the other side to tell us what they're bringing to the table.
Right.
And if they don't, what happens?
Well, if they don't, we have to have a budget by June 30th. 30th.
Right.
On the off chance that that doesn't happen, so that has happened once before in relatively recent history. In 1992, when Democrats were fully in charge, we went right to the brink, and there was the budget was not finalized until July 1st in the middle of the night. We're hoping that we don't have to get to that point. We're hopeful that someone will kind of come to their senses, that someone in the House will provide a program or that the governor will provide a plan. Of course, the other option is to just wait around and see what the federal government is going to offer the state as it comes to low-income pool funding, and then we just start to build a budget on that.
You're really
Hope is
talking
not a
about
plan.
a game of chicken
Hope
here.
is not a plan. I
But
agree.
there
Not a
are
plan.
850,000 people who are at risk. If we can, let's move on to another subject that I really want to hear you both on. I want to get to direct file in just a minute, but gambling expansion. Anna Cherry, is this a go? Is there going to be any kind of gambling bill?
No, not that I can see of. The House put forward a rather robust gambling plan that essentially was dead on arrival in its own chamber. The Senate reacted to that by essentially putting forward a plan that all it does is expand the Seminole Compact for a year. We've amended a few things onto that, and so I do not think there will be a massive expansion of gambling, even a minor expansion of gambling, quite frankly. So really what we have to decide is the Seminole Compact expires this year.
Yeah, July
do we
1st,
yeah, July 1st. So do we continue that for a year because we rely on several hundred millions of dollars on that for our budget, and then just kind of deal with the issue next year? Or do we play another game of chicken and say, all right, we're out of gambling totally and let the compact expire?
Yeah.
I agree. I don't see any expansion of gaming happening. I don't see us going back and addressing even the issues of senior arcades. How many seniors we have in our areas that would go to these bingo halls for fellowship, for socialization, and a bill that was passed within the first couple of days of session in 2013 that made them illegal. And I have seniors in my district saying, you know, why can't I bring back what they would call the senior halls or these arcades? And trying to explain to senior citizens what they were doing was illegal is a very tough thing to do.
No, I'm
So
sure.
even addressing the
I'm sure
nuances,
that
we failed in that.
All right, and one other topic, especially of interest to you, Katie. You've been a champion on this since the early 90s. Florida has had laws that allowed prosecutors, state prosecutors, to what is called direct file. When a juvenile commits a serious crime, then that juvenile can be charged as an adult. But there's a feeling on your part, on the part of State Attorney Kathy Fernandez-Rundle, that it's been abused, it's been used too often. It's kind of a pathway for young people to go into a criminal life. What are you proposing?
Well, I say, you know, Florida we sentence more juveniles as adults than any other state. That to me is appalling and very disturbing. And we looked at how we got there. You know, in this state, for any felony offense, you can direct file a juvenile in adult court.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, while they're still waiting to be adjudicated, they're receiving no education, no social services. We've done a fantastic job here in the last 20 years growing our juvenile justice courts, our programs that provide for diversion and social services. I would rather catch kids at the onset and make sure they don't end up in a life of lawlessness and ending back in what we know now are a very corrupt and incredibly difficult and broken correction system.
Well, the Florida Supreme Court asked us last year to deal with this issue, especially when it came to sentencing juveniles for life sentence, which is something that, unfortunately, in the state of Florida, we did more than in any other state. Right. So we addressed that issue last year. And this year, I think you'll find that that's another issue that for the most part, the House and the Senate are in agreement on, that we need to decrease the direct file as an option.
You know, just very recently in Killian High School, this young woman, 17 years old, I watch, even anecdotally, people who are our viewers and in our own newsroom, a 17-year-old girl is now thought of almost as an adult.
You're branded for life.
You're branded for
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I need to ask both of you a good political question. Marco Rubio cannot, under Florida law, run for both re-election to the Senate and for president. And of course, this week he said he's running for president. So, Ani Cherry, who's going to, I mean, I hear all these names, Carlos Lopez Cantera, among them, of Miami-Dade, who is lieutenant governor, CLC.
Yeah.
Who else is interested? I mean, in fact, your name has been mentioned as well.
There's
You want to announce right here, right now?
I'm not going to. The blessing that we have, I think, in the Republican Party is we've got a lot of great options. Carlos Lopez-Cantero is a good friend. Other congressmen from around the state have put it out there. We'll have, I think, a very robust Republican primary and see kind of where 2016 shakes out.
And Patrick Murphy of West Palm
Yes.
has already said, a congressman, that he's going to run for it.
And I have endorsed him. I'm happy to see younger people running. I think it gives us a nice chance to have a very robust primary in our Democratic Party as well. But I'm just happy at the choices, that we finally have choices. And we can have these types of discussions and debates.
I want to create a new hashtag, robust, is the word of the day. On that note, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for bringing these issues to light.
All right,
Thanks.
Up next, we take a big week of political news right to the Power Roundtable. Stay with us.
All right, it is that time to take a critical look at the week's big news stories with some of our top South Florida journalists.
All going behind the headlines, from the standoff in Tallahassee to campaign moves to decisions about Cuba policy. Mark Caputo, the Florida correspondent for Politico. He's closely covering the legislature in Tallahassee and putting out his daily briefing.
And Bernadette Pardo is a familiar face. She hosts Radio Mambi's morning talk radio program, writes a column for El Nuevo Herald.
Daniel Chang is a reporter at the Miami Herald who, as we've been talking about, has been working on a series about Floridians who fall into the coverage gap between Medicaid and Obamacare. A great front page story in this morning's paper, if you haven't seen it, online as well.
And welcome to you all. Great to have you for the first time, Dan. Welcome. Congrats on your piece. Mark, I've got to begin with you and ask. We just heard two, I think, influential state legislators say we don't know how the impasse is going to be resolved. So how do you think it's going to be resolved?
Well, you know, if I knew, I'd be a rich man.
You would have been in the first segment.
I would imagine that the feds are going to cough up some amount of money, and then the House is going to have to play its hand. It's very kind of complicated stuff. There's something called general revenue money. That's the general tax money that comes into the state, and the House and the governor are essentially against spending it on this low-income pool federal hospital fund. However, if the feds kick in a certain amount of money, likely the Senate will say, okay, we're going to plug in some of this general revenue. Then it's up to the House to decide whether to take that, and we're going to have to find out what the House wants. The House is going to want some tax cuts, but it's also going to want some definite healthcare policy things, very conservative healthcare policy ideas, and then we'll have a negotiation. But it's to the wire, it's at the end, and there's a possibility things could blow up and be very embarrassing.
And that's for 1 year. That's just kicking the can down the road.
That's what government does. That's what everybody does. I mean, it's a can-kicking legislature in Congress. You know?
They should be soccer players, but it's very sad that we cannot mobilize enough to, first of all, like you described these people, they're working people. What's wrong with giving them a chance at insurance? It's not like the end of the world. And on top of that, it makes sense because then you would not need those LIP funds if most people are insured. I cannot conceive.
I think that's what we've been talking about, numbers and politics, but it's really about the people it affects. And that's what you don't see, and that's what you've done.
Certainly, and that's what we wanted to try to do, was to bring to light that these are, for the large part, working poor people. And the money is already there in the Affordable Care Act to help extend Medicaid for them. And really what we're talking about is the new way of doing things under the Affordable Care Act as opposed to the old way. Instead of sending that money to the hospitals, taking some of that money and putting it into Medicaid so that people can decide where they want to go and how to get their health care. And
one of the people in your series, her name is Isabel Betancourt.
Yes.
And very quickly, let's take a listen to, from the first person perspective, what Isabel is going through.
We're not charity cases. We are not asking for handouts. We are not looking to live off of the government. Okay, I am going to school to graduate in the very near future, to get a job that can afford me a decent lifestyle.
And this is a woman who has severe rheumatoid arthritis, correct? I mean,
That's
she's
right.
had some surgeries already. I mean, I read about her in your piece this morning. And I mean, a person of substance, a good member of society who is struggling with her health and with her income situation.
That's right. And Isabel has basically spent most of her life trying to find health insurance either through work, which she had for a while when she worked for the city of Hialeah, and on her own. And now really she is on her own because she falls into that gap where she doesn't qualify for Medicaid as a category because she has no dependent children, she's not considered disabled, and she doesn't make enough to begin receiving the subsidies under the Affordable Care Act. So what she does is that she's fortunate enough because she lives with her father and doesn't pay rent, she's able to take the money from her part-time job and basically spend almost her entire paycheck to buy her own plan. And
but she's got co-pays on her own plan, so it's not
right.
a panacea. You know, we should point out, I believe you pointed out, Dan, in your piece, that there are 140,000 people in Miami-Dade County, 80,000 in Broward, who are in this coverage gap. I mean, we're talking about a lot of people.
Those are just the people in the coverage gap, that's right. And there are also, we'll continue to have a problem with the uninsured when you consider the undocumented and others who don't. But the sad part about that is that these folks could get help right away if the Florida legislature were to act and adopt some sort of an expansion plan, maybe even something like the Senate has, to help them.
So, Mark, you go to Tallahassee and you meet up with House Republican members and you ask them, what's the roadblock to what appears to be a no-brainer unless we're all missing something? And what do they say?
3 words: Obama. They don't actually quite say it, but that's the reality. I mean, remember, Obamacare is actually based by and large on a Republican idea. Once Obama became, once Obamacare became identified with Obama, it suddenly became rather anathema to the Republican Party. In the end, it's by and large, there's a policy and a political reason. The political reason is this. Most people who are falling into this coverage gap, most people who are Medicaid eligible, by and large, fit the profile of Democratic voters. Most people who are totally opposed to Medicaid expansion and Obamacare are, by and large, Republican voters. If I'm a Republican, there is no real political payoff. We'll go to the policy now. There's no payoff in a Republican primary. I'm opening myself up to a challenge from the right if I vote for Obamacare if I'm in the Florida House.
But isn't anybody saying if this doesn't get done, every voter
Everyone's
pays
going to suffer. We're going to have to pay more for taxes locally.
Every voter
and
pays.
then it would be nice if the governor remembered that when he was campaigning for re-election, he was actually in favor of Medicaid expansion.
Well, that was after he was against it.
Yeah, so, and then he says Charlie Crist was a flip-flopper. I mean, this is a pretty major issue to flip-flop.
He paid lip service for it. I mean, he really didn't campaign on it. He'd said it before the campaign season, then fell real quiet. But that's just the political side of it. On the policy side, one thing that's unstated here is that for years, Florida has ratcheted back reimbursement rates, and the Medicaid system in and of itself does not have a lot of providers because there's no money in it. So eventually, if you do expand Medicaid, you are going to wind up having to put more state dollars into the system, and that means for Republican legislators, there's less money to cut taxes and less money to be able to cut government, and they don't want to be in that situation. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, but those are your political and policy reasons for not expanding Medicaid.
You know, Dan Chang, I've got to believe that there are some Republican state House members from South Florida, Broward, well, maybe only one in Broward, but several in Miami-Dade, Carlos Trujillo, and some others, who they're going to have some constituents who are going to look at this story today and go to them and say, how can you be against this? If enough of those constituents go to those Republican state House members, maybe that could make a difference?
Well, I could tell you that there are several thousand constituents within Representative Trujillo's district who fall into the coverage gap. I don't know if there are enough of them to influence him to support some form of Medicaid expansion, but really, I don't know what he would say to them. I tried to reach him for this story. We have colleagues up in Tallahassee Bureau who said they did speak with him, and I think essentially his response was, hold on for something better. And this argument about Medicaid being a broken system is really difficult to understand. What Mark says is absolutely true. Florida for years has resisted increasing the reimbursement rate for physicians, and that really takes away their incentive to participate because they would be providing care for less than their actual cost. And, if we were to have a Medicaid expansion program, I think we would have more people covered and we could begin to have...
And Jackson, in fact, Jackson Memorial or Jackson Health System would realize not a profit, but would get more money than it does under the current system, would it not?
Well, I'm not sure about that. See, Jackson is in a difficult position where its interests, I think, are perhaps opposed to the residents of Dade County who are in the coverage gap, because what I've heard the CEO of Jackson Health System say is that if LIP goes away, Jackson would lose about $200 million a year, whereas if Medicaid expansion were approved, it would get a net gain of about $50 million a year. The problem is that for the people who rely on Jackson for their care, what's called the Charity Care Program, it's the most generous discounted care program in the county, is that the folks that we spoke to tell us about long waits, that it's difficult to see the doctors that you want to see when you want to see them. If you just gave them a Medicaid card, they could go.
are high for them as well, which is difficult.
We take a quick break, come right back. Got a lot more to talk about. Stay with us.
Brandon. Welcome back on this Sunday morning. It is time for the roundtable, and we are going through several topics. And now let's go to Marco Rubio. He made us a big announcement, Bernie, on
like
Monday.
a long time ago.
Yeah, I was just telling Mark, it seems like a year ago, and it was on Monday.
It was on Monday, Monday afternoon, early evening at the Freedom Tower. I was there. Actually, I couldn't get inside. I mean, all the media were kept outside.
We took good care of him outside.
But what did you think of his speech?
I thought it was a bit long, to tell you the truth, but I thought he was moving. He's very effective. He's very eloquent. He's gotten rave reviews from New Hampshire, where he's with about 600 other candidates. He's very personable. Very personable. But I think that, you know, Fabiola Santiago pointed out in her column that whereas he offers himself as a new face, the future, and young and energetic, which he is, his views are more old in terms of things like climate change, abortion, gay marriage.
Well,
he's not in the 21st century.
Especially in a week where there's all kinds of talk about taking Cuba off the state-sponsored terror list. And he is in favor of keeping the embargo right in place, which, whether you're for or against that, is a 50-year-old concept for the new generation.
But that's part of the Cuban-American legislators in Congress are not going to back down on this because it's a matter of pride. It's a matter of...
Well, when you consider how Cuba was placed on the state sponsor of terrorism list, it wasn't like they were training terrorists to go out into other countries and, you know, cause terror. It was really because of the civil war in El Salvador and back in the 80s when Reagan was in office. And I don't think that's the same idea that we all have of what terrorism is.
Well, Mark, it seems to me that it was inevitable on December 17th when President Obama said we're going to have a new Cuba policy that Cuba was going to come off this list.
Yeah.
There was never really any doubt about it.
And I think kind of politically speaking, Marco Rubio fell to his knees and said, thank you, Barack Obama.
Yeah.
You have made me more relevant in the national media. Ever since December 17th,
he's been
Marco Rubio has been the point person opposing Obama's Cuba policy. Then
every foreign policy.
Yeah, well, then like the day after Rubio announced on Monday, maybe 2 days after the state sponsor of terrorism issue came up, that gave Rubio even more of a platform. It certainly plays well for him. As to the point about Rubio saying, hey, I'm a new guy with old policies, I can't help but look at the similarities, not necessarily ideological, between Barack Obama, the candidate, and Marco Rubio, the candidate. Almost every knock against Obama from the Republicans, now the Democrats are going to knock Marco Rubio for. So, you know, everything old is new again.
State legislator, although as a legislator, Marco was much more influential than Obama was in Illinois, but they've both been first-term senators. They're both extremely well-spoken, bright young lawyers.
And one more similarity. They're the only ones that really had a hard bringing up. They were not rich. Marco was no
humble
rich.
beginnings.
So, you know, you can relate to the struggles of the middle class, which is what he's trying to
Well, somebody, as we know, who is not from the middle class is Jeb Bush, and he has yet to formally say that he's running. But, Mark, a lot of not formally saying I'm a candidate is to be able to raise huge amounts of money, because once they say I'm running for president, then the limit is $2,700 in campaign contributions.
That is, Jeb Bush is not an official candidate now, in part so that he can more closely work with the super PAC, which can take unlimited corporate contributions. Once he's an announced candidate, the amount of working with the super PAC is more diminished. But yes, Jeb, we get the joke. Yeah, you're not running for president, which is why everyone around you is so angry with Marco Rubio for saying he's running for president.
Which is why he's in New Hampshire at the moment.
Exactly.
Right. It's just, there was a group that's suing Jeb to actually force him to declare. I mean, he's going to declare soon. But my favorite thing I read was from Patricia Mazzei in the Miami Herald, one of her blog posts about Jeb Bush asked about Marco Rubio running for president. He said, it is what it is. Not like, hey, I'm happy for my friend, but it is what it is. It's as if he had gotten a diagnosis of an illness or something.
Well, frame out what's happening this week in New Hampshire. I mean, how is he playing? I read something that made me laugh. They think he's way too moderate. Thinking, does he remember how when he was governor?
But I have to say,
what is that?
Jeb has forgotten how to speak conservative. He was asked in New Hampshire about this lip Medicaid fight, and he said there should be compromise and they should work together and blah, 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 blah. When Marco Rubio was asked, he was like, the federal government shouldn't hold the state hostage. Bam. So Rubio's speaking conservative. Jeb isn't. Jeb said, hey, let's have a nomination vote on Lynch for the Attorney General. Rubio's in the kind of hell no camp on that. So.
And is that a reborn? Is that a rebirth?
I don't know. Jeb was always very pragmatic. He is conservative, but at a certain point, you're going to have to talk to the base, and it almost seems at times he enjoys poking a stick at the base, or he doesn't. He's not pandering enough.
He described one of his most conservative moments, the Terry Schiavo saga, as being one of his greatest regrets, which might be an effort to try to.
I thought he said
I don't think he said it was a regret. No, I thought he said he had no regret.
He said he didn't regret.
I think in the way that it ended, right? Not in the way that he acted, but in the fact that she died, which I think is something that probably touches.
But he's a very thoughtful candidate. He studies things, he thinks them through, he does not improvise.
Primaries are not for thoughtful candidates, it's for passion. That's what Republican and Democratic primaries are for.
When he was governor, it was his way or the highway. There was no more passionate than Jeb Bush saying, here's what I want and I want it
Bernie,
now.
You know the Cuban American community as well as anybody. Isn't there some kind of people must be torn? Here you've got this young, bright, attractive Marco Rubio, everybody's son, everybody's nephew.
And he's very cute.
And he's a nice-looking guy. And then
they call him, I love Frank Bruni, he said he's a dermatological dissident. He's the only one who doesn't need plastic surgery.
That's very cute. I didn't see that. And then you have Jeb, who has this immense long history, who once checked Hispanic on his voter registration.
Yes.
Fluent, Spanish speaker.
More Hispanic at heart than Marco, in many ways, in his understanding of the immigrant experience and why they crossed the border and a number of things. However, very torn. But I noticed a lot of them just jumped into the Wawa with Marco because there's nothing like the tribal urge in politics.
The Wawa. For anybody unfamiliar with this is a Cuban term for the bus. Se va la Wawa.
That's going to be our new hashtag too, robust, hashtag Wawa.
All right, so what else have we got here? I thought his rollout speech was good. But it was very long on moral philosophy, very short on policy.
Right.
He didn't.
Well, most people, when they give these he's in the process of introducing himself to the nation. I mean, we know him. He has absolutely no use for the Florida media anymore. He needs the New Hampshire media, the Iowa media, the South Carolina.
Tell me about it, Mark. I mean, we've invited him for the last couple of weeks, and if you have a chance to be on Meet the Press, they're going to be on Meet the Press.
Right.
All right. Let's talk just briefly, if we can, about Hillary Clinton. It's sort of astounding to me.
This isn't about Chipotle.
Yes, it is. It's about Chipotle and her burrito bowl. The big news of the week, Dan. I mean, I guess we all
I think Jeb Bush responded to that by saying that he gets in his own car and drives to the Chipotle on US 1 and gets it to go and drives himself back home and eats it at home.
After he stops at the Biltmore.
Perhaps for a quick game of speed golf.
Speed golf.
After the laughs, isn't there someone who is going to say, why does that matter? Why does America focus on that?
Because it's easy to focus. It's easy to focus on small things. Remember, George H.W. Bush didn't know the price of eggs.
Right.
Remember, we still remember that to this day.
At least that's an economy question.
Well, this was a question about cheapness because she apparently didn't put some change in the tip jar.
It's not a restaurant. It's fast food.
Well, today I was in Dunkin' Donuts and there's a little jar there. I put the coins in. I mean, it's not necessarily an uncommon thing.
How many coins did you?
I didn't even count. It was just the change, then I kept the bills.
Was that a statement on immigration that she went to Chipotle?
It
used to be owned by McDonald's.
We're out of time.
Not ask that.
Great roundtable. Thank you all for coming in, and Dan, look forward to your next piece in the Herald.
Thank you.
All right, up next, a fight over weather and how police officers should use body cameras. That's looming in South Florida. A closer look at where they are working is next. As As I'm sure you know, body cameras are a hot topic in the world of policing. They record and document the officers' actions.
And the debate is growing in South Florida and in Miami-Dade. The question, if the money is there, why aren't cameras in use? And that's where Hatzel Vela started for this report.
Shut down! Hands up! Down, shoot! Ferguson, Missouri. North Charleston, South Carolina. And here at home in Miami Gardens, cases some argue police cameras may have helped prevent. Locally, the largest agency around, Miami-Dade Police, is in the process of getting them. $1 million allocated for the first 500 body cameras. The goal is to outfit every officer on the force. But before they can do that, they have to hash out policy. And Mayor Carlos Jimenez says the police union is stalling.
They say, oh, we can't meet for a month, we can't meet for 3 weeks, we can't meet until May. You know, we're through with that.
This is to show rapid response.
Union President John Rivera says he's not opposed to body cams, but is opposed to the approach the mayor's taking.
The mayor's wanting to go super fast for political reasons. We want this thing done right.
My job as mayor is to protect the citizens and also the good police officers that are wrongfully accused many times. That camera works both ways.
Local 10 went up to Daytona Beach.
Occurred in the parking lot, single vehicle accident.
Where about 100 of the city's officers are using them. The chief of Daytona Beach, Mike Cheatwood, says so far the cams are helping decipher who's at fault.
Let it go, dude. Let it go.
Like in the case of a police-involved shooting where a man was threatening a woman with a knife. Body cams have caught crimes on camera, like this domestic violence situation. And they also catch officers misbehaving.
You just can't show the good stuff. You have to show the bad stuff, because there are bad things, and we've had that.
Because of body cams, one officer was fired, another resigned, and some were retrained. Since they started the program, the chief says complaints against officers have dropped dramatically. Back here at home, Mayor Jimenez assures us he's moving forward and will have policy and procedures in place so body cams are on the streets within the year.
And again, that was Hatzel Vela reporting. Hatzel, thanks.
And if you want to learn more about that story, there is a link on our website at local10.com. And when we come back, one of the bills that seems to be dying in the state legislature, and that's a good thing. Stay with us.
So temperatures again heating up really fast, already in the low to mid 80s out there. Before you know it, we'll be hitting 90 degrees. So get ready for another hot one this Sunday afternoon. And the wind flow coming out of the south up to 12 miles per hour currently in Homestead. That's going to push anything that develops well to the north of us. If you head out to the beach, use that sunscreen. And here's a look at your 7-day forecast. We're expecting better chance for rain for the first half of the week. Drier conditions will return by Friday. Enjoy your Sunday.
Jennifer, thanks. Until this week, Florida looked to be on track to become the first state to make it a crime to use a bathroom. By all accounts, the so-called single-sex bathroom bill is circling the drain, as it should. The eventual law would require that men and women, boys and girls, go to the public bathrooms designated for the gender he or she was born. I guess most women have broken that rule when the lines are long at the ladies' room. But the bill obviously targets transgender men and women, some of whom gave emotional testimony at committee hearings about discrimination, being targeted for harassment, even violence. The bathroom bill hadn't gotten far in the Senate, but it sailed through the House until this week when the chair of the Judiciary Committee left it off the agenda. He reportedly decided it was too divisive. The sponsor, Miami Republican Frank Artiles, frames it as a safety measure, keeping bathrooms safe from would-be predators. But gender identity has nothing to do with crime, and the bill did nothing extra to prevent real predators of either gender. At this point, if the bill is to move forward, it would have to be an amendment to another related bill. Improbable, but not impossible. So here's hoping that lawmakers, as we've been discussing today, will focus efforts on completing important and positive goals for the state and finally flush that bathroom bill. So, what do you think? Please do weigh in on that or any topic that you like.
And you can reach us via email, Facebook, Twitter, or any way you like. Here are the addresses. And always remember, stay informed, get involved.
Always. Love to hear from you. Have a great Sunday. You have a great Sunday.
And you too.
Thank you, sir.